When Maya Chen opened her grandmother's safety deposit box, she expected deeds and jewelry, not a manila envelope marked "Do not open until I'm gone," containing 12 Polaroids of something impossible. Faces, hands, eyes that held knowledge. Her grandmother, a field nurse in the Cascades for 40 years, had photographed them. And when Maya posted one online asking, "What is this?" anthropologists, geneticists, and government officials descended on her doorstep within 18 hours. Because her grandmother hadn't just documented Bigfoot, she'd documented first contact, and somebody had been hiding it ever since. Maya Chen had never thought of her grandmother as a keeper of secrets. Ruth Chen had been practical, matter-of-fact, the kind of woman who labeled her spice jars in block letters and kept detailed ledgers of household expenses. So when Maya signed the inheritance papers at the Seattle Law Office that grey November afternoon in 2023, she anticipated finding what most people leave behind: bank statements, a modest life insurance policy, perhaps a few pieces of jade jewelry passed down through the maternal line. The safety deposit box key felt ordinary in her palm. Cold brass, numbered 447, attached to a faded paper tag in her grandmother's handwriting, "Open privately, alone." The bank vault smelled of recycled air and metal. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the key, not from grief, though that sat heavy in her chest 3 weeks after the funeral, but from something else, an instinct she couldn't name. The box slid out with a metallic whisper. Inside, one manila envelope unmarked, except for a single sentence in Ruth's distinctive hand: "Do not open until I'm gone." Maya carried it to the privacy booth, her heart rate climbing. She broke the seal. 12 Polaroids spilled across the table, and Maya's breath stopped. The first image showed a face, not human, not quite. The brow ridge was pronounced, the jaw massive, the nose broad and flat, but the eyes, dark, intelligent, ringed with what might have been exhaustion or sorrow, looked directly at the camera with an expression Maya recognized instantly as awareness. This being knew it was being photographed, knew what a camera was. Her hands moved through the sequence. A torso covered in reddish-brown hair, matted with what looked like blood and forest debris. Hands, enormous, long-fingered, one palm facing the camera to show dermal ridges that swirled in distinctly primate patterns. A broader shot showing the subject lying on what appeared to be a hospital gurney, an IV line running into one massive arm. The timestamp on each photo, August 1977, 46 years ago. Maya's training as a molecular anthropology PhD candidate kicked in, overriding shock. She catalogued details with academic precision. Body proportions, arms slightly longer relative to torso than human norm, suggesting arboreality or brachiation. Hair density and distribution, consistent with cold-adapted large mammal, but the face showed remarkable hair reduction, more hominid than ape. Most striking, the technological interface. This individual was receiving medical care. Someone had inserted an IV. Someone had moved them to clinical facilities. Her grandmother had been that someone. Maya photographed the Polaroids with her phone, hands steadier now, then returned them carefully to the envelope. But she kept one image on her screen: the face, those eyes. That evening, in her Capitol Hill apartment, surrounded by printouts of human evolution timelines and genome mapping software open on her laptop, Maya made the choice that would break open everything. She posted the facial image to an anthropology discussion board she frequented, cropping it to show only from mid-torso up, with a simple caption, "Found in grandmother's effects," attempting to identify species context. Possibly fabricated, but material appears authentic to 1977. Any insights? She expected skepticism, perhaps accusations of hoaxing, maybe a few jokes about Bigfoot. Instead, within 40 minutes, her direct messages exploded. Within 2 hours, her phone rang, a Seattle area code she didn't recognize. "Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Alvarez. I need to speak with you immediately about the image you posted. Please, This is not a hoax or a threat. I work with the Department of Interior. Do not post any additional images. Do not speak to anyone else. I can be at your location in 15 minutes. Maya's academic instincts warred with her common sense. I'm not taking down the post. If this is real, it's real. The woman's voice carried a weight Maya felt in her sternum. Your grandmother saved a life in 1977, several lives actually, and there are protocols in place, protocols she helped establish about what happens if this information surfaces. Please, I knew Ruth, let me come talk to you. The line between scientific breakthrough and personal danger had never felt so thin. Maya looked again at the face on her screen, at those eyes that held something like pleading. 15 minutes, she said. I'll make coffee. Dr. Alvarez arrived with an older man she introduced as Dr. Ben Whitmore, both carrying identification that confirmed they worked for the U.S. Geological Survey's Biological Research Division. They sat in Maya's small living room, declining the coffee, and Alvarez pulled out a tablet. Your grandmother never told you about the Pine Creek incident. She barely talked about her work, just that she did wilderness first response for logging camps and ranger stations. Whitmore leaned forward. His face was weathered, deeply lined, the face of someone who'd spent decades in mountain environments. Ruth Chen was one of the most extraordinary field medics I've ever known, and on August 12, 1977, she got a call that changed everything. The story came out in careful clinical detail. A logging crew in the Central Cascades, Whitmore wouldn't specify exactly where, had found an injured animal, something huge, something that looked like a man. The crew foreman, shaken, had radioed for help. Ruth had been dispatched, thinking she'd find a bear attack victim or an injured hiker. Instead, she'd found him. That's how Alvarez said it. Him, not it. Massive trauma, Alvarez continued, pulling up old medical notes on her tablet, notes in Ruth's handwriting. Apparent territorial conflict with another male. Severe lacerations across torso and right leg. Mild hypothermia from blood loss. And he was conscious, in pain. And when your grandmother approached with her medical kit, she paused. He held out his arm. He'd seen humans use tools before. He knew she might help. Maya's hands had gone cold. You're saying my grandmother treated a member of a cryptic hominin population that has persisted in the Pacific Northwest for at least 50,000 years. Whitmore's voice was steady. They diverged from the human lineage somewhere between Homo heidelbergensis and early Homo sapiens, developed a highly specialized lifestyle strategy centered on concealment and low population density. They're not numerous. Current estimates put the North American population somewhere between 800 and 1,500 individuals, scattered across remote territories from Northern California to British Columbia. Maya's training reasserted itself. That's impossible. Genetic bottleneck, inbreeding depression, minimum viable population. They're not isolated, Alvarez interrupted. That's one of the things your grandmother helped us understand. They have a sophisticated system of long-distance mate exchange. Individuals travel hundreds of miles for reproductive opportunities. Their culture emphasizes genetic diversity. They somehow understand, even without written language or formal science, that they need it to survive. And there's evidence of occasional admixture events with humans. Very occasional, but it happens. Maya's mind reeled. The implications cascaded through every framework she knew. Conservation biology, anthropology, ethics. God, the ethics. If this is true, if they're real and you've known, why isn't this public knowledge? Why didn't my grandmother? Because your grandmother asked him. Whitmore's voice softened. After she stabilized him, after she'd cleaned the wounds and started antibiotics and made sure he'd live, she asked, not in words, not at first, but your grandmother was... He paused, looking genuinely emotional. She was extraordinary at communication. She drew pictures, simple symbols, showed him a picture of herself with other humans, showed him a picture of him with others like him. then showed him a picture of crowds, cameras, capture, and asked which he wanted. He chose silence, Maya whispered. They all did. Over the next 6 weeks, while he recovered, Ruth set up a shelter, brought supplies, monitored his healing. Others came. Family group, we think. And Ruth documented everything. The photographs, yes, but also behavioral observations. Communication attempts. She learned they have a gestural language, highly sophisticated. They make art, pictograms mostly, but also sculptural arrangements of stone and wood. They bury their dead. They teach their young, and they want desperately to be left alone. Alvarez pulled up another image on her tablet, a drawing in Ruth's hand, showing a sequence of gestural symbols. Your grandmother spent the rest of her career as part of a very small, very quiet monitoring network, making sure logging didn't push into core territories, tracking population health through environmental DNA, documenting sightings and making sure they stayed quiet. It's not an official program. It can't be. But there are maybe 20 of us now, scattered across agencies and universities, who know the truth and work to protect it. Maya looked again at the photograph on her phone. Those eyes. What happened to him? The one she saved? Whitmore smiled, and it was genuine. He lived. Ruth saw him twice more over the years, always briefly, always at a distance. The second time, he left her a gift. A small carved stone shaped like a bird. It's in the archive. And the third time, his voice caught. The third time was 2 years before she died. He was old by then, grey around the face, and he touched his forehead to hers. Just for a moment, then he left. The gesture struck Maya with unexpected force, recognition, gratitude, trust. Why am I learning this now? She asked. Alvarez's expression turned serious. Because your post was seen by 17,000 people before we could contain it, and because facial recognition software has gotten very, very good. Within 4 hours of your post, 3 different AI analysis companies flagged it as biologically anomalous and started signal boosting it. We've taken it down, claimed copyright violation, but she met Maya's eyes. The truth is, we've been losing the fight for secrecy for years. Trail cameras everywhere, consumer DNA testing, satellite imaging, drones. It's becoming impossible to protect them through silence alone. We need a new approach, and we think you might help us find it. What kind of approach? That's what we need to figure out, but it starts with you understanding what your grandmother understood. They're not animals. They're not curiosities. They're people who have the right to exist without being turned into a spectacle or a specimen. And you, with your background in population genetics and your grandmother's legacy, you might be able to help us understand how to protect them in a world that's running out of blank spaces on the map. Maya looked once more at the photograph, at the face that showed pain and dignity in equal measure, at eyes that asked a question she was only beginning to understand. I need to see the rest, she said. All of it. Everything my grandmother documented. Alvarez nodded. We were hoping you'd say that. Pack a bag. We have a facility in the Cascades. And Maya, she paused. Your grandmother spent 46 years carrying this secret because she loved them, really loved them as people. As neighbors, be prepared for that weight, because once you truly understand what they are and what they face, you can't unknow it, and you can't stop caring. Maya thought of her grandmother, practical, meticulous, labeled spice jars and detailed ledgers. A woman who'd kept the most important work of her life entirely hidden, who'd chosen protection over recognition, who'd touched foreheads with someone from another branch of the human family tree and said nothing, told no one, claimed no glory. I'm ready, Maya said, and meant it. The facility wasn't what Maya expected. No gleaming research laboratory, no military installation. Instead, 3 hours east of Seattle, tucked into a narrow valley surrounded by old-growth forest and accessible only by logging road, stood what appeared to be an abandoned ranger station. The sign by the entrance read, Cascade Wildlife Monitoring Post, Private Property, faded and unremarkable enough that no one would look twice. Inside, the deception fell away. The main room held equipment that belonged in a genomics lab, PCR machines, a next-generation sequencer, computers running analysis software Maya recognized from her own research. Specimen freezers lined one wall, maps covered another, topographic overlays marked with colored zones and cryptic notations. Whitmore caught her examining the maps. Territory ranges, family groups. We track them primarily through environmental DNA now. Water sources, scat, hair samples. Direct observation is rare. They're extraordinarily good at avoiding detection. How many direct contacts have there been since 1977? Documented. Alvarez pulled up a database. 47. Most very brief. A handful were extended interactions like your grandmother's, usually medical intervention or, in one case, a juvenile who'd become separated from family and approached a monitoring team. But the majority are what we call acknowledgement events. They know we're here. They choose to show themselves, usually very briefly, usually as a message. What kind of message? We see you seeing us. Stay back. Or sometimes, we need you to know about a threat. Whitmore pulled up a photo dated 2019. Clear boot prints in mud, deliberately placed in the center of a trail, each print showing 6 toes. This was left 50 meters from a proposed logging road extension. The individual who left them has 5 toes. We verified that from other tracks. They intentionally created something anomalous to draw attention and scrutiny. The logging company brought in a university team to investigate. The road project got delayed, then cancelled when environmental review flagged endangered murrelet habitat. Maya studied the image. They manipulated the scientific process. They're brilliant at working around us. They understand our institutions, our curiosity, our bureaucracy. They can't read or write, but they comprehend how our society functions well enough to occasionally nudge it in directions that benefit them. Alvarez opened a cabinet, revealing shelves of carefully labeled artifacts. And we've learned that they've been doing this for a very, very long time. She placed a stone tool on the table. Found in a cache in the Olympics. Age, approximately 12,000 years. Clovis-adjacent manufacturing technique, but modified larger, adapted for much bigger hands. They were here when humans arrived across the Bering land bridge. They watched us spread, and they chose at some point to disappear. The implications settled over Maya like weight. Cultural decision, active concealment strategy. We think so. Your grandmother had a theory. We found it in her notes. Whitmore pulled up a document, Ruth's meticulous handwriting scanned and preserved. She believed there was a founder event, possibly around 15,000 years ago. A population split. Some individuals chose to remain in contact with humans, to trade and interact. Others rejected that path and moved into the deepest forests. The ones who stayed in contact were absorbed, admixture. They became genetically us, and the ones who left became them. Evolutionarily, they paid a price. Small population, reduced genetic diversity, heightened vulnerability to disease and environmental change, but they retained something else: cultural continuity, autonomy, the right to define themselves on their own terms. Maya processed this. From an evolutionary perspective, it was a gamble. From an ethical perspective, it was a choice that deserved respect. You said you needed my help. She looked between them. What specifically? Alvarez's expression grew somber. We're losing them. Not quickly. It's not dramatic. But the population curve has been declining for 30 years. Genetic analysis shows reduced heterozygosity. We're seeing signs of inbreeding depression. Juvenile mortality up, birth rates down. Climate change is shifting their core habitat. Megafires are fragmenting territory ranges, and they can't adapt fast enough. At current trajectory, they'll be functionally extinct within 200 years. Maybe less. Then they need intervention, genetic rescue, assisted migration. They've refused. Whitmore's voice was flat. Every time we've tried to broach it, through the few communication channels we have, the answer is no. They won't accept visible conservation programs. They won't allow capture for reproductive management. They believe, and they're not wrong, that the moment they become an acknowledged endangered species, they lose everything. They become specimens, study subjects, zoo animals. They'll accept death over that. Maya felt the ethical trap snap shut. So you're asking me to, what? Find a way to save them without their consent? That's every paternalistic conservation nightmare. No. Alvarez cut her off. We're asking you to learn to speak with them, really speak, well enough to explain what genetic rescue could look like, well enough to negotiate terms they might accept. Your grandmother got the furthest anyone ever has with communication. She had weeks with an injured individual who needed her. But we've never had anyone with your specific expertise try to build on what she started. Molecular anthropology, population genetics. You can explain things like heterozygosity and genetic drift in ways they might understand if we can find a shared symbolic framework. And if they still say no, then we honor that, Whitmore said quietly, even if it means watching them disappear. But we have to try. And we have to try in a way that respects their agency. Your grandmother built trust. Maybe you can build language. The archive room held everything Ruth had documented across 46 years. Photographs, not just the 12 Maya had found, but hundreds. Behavioral observations, drawings showing gestural communication sequences, audio recordings of vocalizations, low-frequency calls, wood-knocking patterns, what might have been singing, and genetic data, hair samples, environmental DNA, carefully extracted and preserved. Maya spent 3 days immersed in it, barely sleeping. The picture that emerged was of a people who had refined survival through invisibility into an art form. They moved primarily at night or during heavy weather. They used water to eliminate scent trails. They watched humans constantly, learning patterns and routines to avoid contact. And they communicated across vast distances through systems that left minimal trace. Rock stacks, stick arrangements, long-distance vocalizations below human hearing range. But they also lived. Ruth's photographs showed mothers with infants, adolescents play wrestling, adults grooming one another. One image captured a young individual holding what appeared to be a carved wooden object, possibly a flute or whistle, held to the lips in a gesture unmistakably musical. They had culture, they had joy, and they were dying quietly, unseen, with a dignity that made Maya's chest ache. On the 4th day, Alvarez entered the archive room to find Maya surrounded by printouts, working through a gestural communication matrix. I have an idea, Maya said. We can't bring them to us. But what if we brought the tools to them? Gene drives, synthetic biology. If I could explain the concept through visual language, show them how genetic diversity could be restored without capture or visibility, that would require contact, extended contact. Then we arrange it. We find a way to ask for it. A meeting, negotiation. Maya met Alvarez's eyes. My grandmother saved a life. That created a debt, or at least a relationship. Can we find him? The one she saved? Is he still alive? Alvarez and Whitmore exchanged glances. We think so, Whitmore said carefully. We've tracked an older male in the Central Cascades who shows behavioral patterns consistent with having had prior human contact. Less avoidance, more observation. And genetic analysis from environmental DNA shows he's related to at least 7 other individuals in the region, patriarch of a family group. Then that's where we start. We go to his territory. We bring symbols of Ruth, her medical bag, her photographs, something that says we're connected to her. And we ask. Ask what? For a conversation. A chance to explain what's happening to them at the genetic level and what might be possible. Not to force solutions, to offer options, to treat them like the intelligent, autonomous people they are. Alvarez was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a small object from her jacket pocket, a carved stone bird, Wings spread, no bigger than a thumb. Your grandmother left this in the archive with instructions. If someone from her family ever came looking, if that person understood what she'd understood, we were to give them this. It's his, the male she saved, his mark. The stone was cool and smooth in Maya's palm, the carving precise. Wings made from careful abrasion, eyes marked with tiny drilled holes. He gave this to her twice, Alvarez said, once as thanks, and again, years later, as a promise. We think it means, I remember, I trust, call if you need. Maya closed her fingers around it. Then let's call. The preparation took 2 weeks. Maya worked with a graphic designer and an anthropologist specializing in visual communication to develop a pictographic system. The concepts they needed to convey were complex: DNA, inheritance, genetic diversity, population bottleneck, synthetic modification, but broken into visual metaphors: trees with withering branches, streams that grew narrower, patterns that repeated until they locked. The ideas became transmissible. They created a series of durable image panels, weatherproof and portable. And they developed a protocol: approach the territory where the old male was most frequently tracked. Leave the carved bird with an invitation, symbolic images showing meeting, conversation, choice. And wait. Maya insisted on going herself. Alvarez agreed with conditions: satellite communication, daily check-ins, and a strict policy of retreat if any sign of hostility appeared. On a cold morning in late February 2024, Maya hiked into the Central Cascades with 40 pounds of equipment on her back. The location was a narrow valley where 3 drainages met, surrounded by old-growth cedar and hemlock. Environmental DNA samples from the previous 6 months showed consistent presence of at least 4 individuals, including the genetic signature that matched the 1977 samples. She set up a simple camp: tarp shelter, sleeping bag, camp stove. Then she arranged the invitation. The carved bird placed on a flat rock. Around it, she positioned 3 image panels. The first showed a figure, Ruth, rendered from photographs, recognizable. The second showed Maya, with a line connecting her to Ruth, indicating kinship. The third showed 2 figures facing each other, with symbols between them. Question marks, open hands, the gesture Ruth had documented as meaning share knowledge. Then Maya retreated to her camp and waited. The first day brought only silence and the ordinary sounds of forest. The second day she woke to find the carved bird moved, not taken, but repositioned so it faced her camp. A response: I see you. On the third day, at dusk, he came. Maya saw him first as movement in peripheral vision, then as a shape that resolved into solidity at the edge of the clearing. Massive, easily 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to fill doorways. Reddish-brown hair covering most of the body, graying around the face, and the eyes, dark and deep-set, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She stood slowly, keeping her hands visible and open, palms forward in the universal gesture of peace. Then she touched her fingers to her forehead, the greeting Ruth had documented. He stood motionless for 10 heartbeats. Then he raised one enormous hand and touched his own forehead, returning the gesture. Maya's throat tightened. Connection, acknowledgement. She moved carefully to the image panels, pointing first to Ruth, then to herself, then to him. Grandmother, granddaughter, friend. His gaze followed her gestures. Then he stepped closer, not threatening but deliberate, and knelt by the panels. One massive finger traced the line between Ruth and Maya. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and his expression held a question she felt rather than saw. You carry her purpose? Maya nodded, touching her chest, then gesturing to the forest around them, then back to him. I care. I want to help. He studied her for a long moment. Then he reached out. She forced herself not to flinch, and very gently touched her forehead with his fingertips. The same gesture he'd given Ruth, transfer of trust. When he withdrew, he gestured for her to wait. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest. Maya stood in the gathering darkness, shaking not from fear, but from the enormity of what had just happened. Contact, recognition, and something that felt like permission. He returned 20 minutes later, and he wasn't alone. There were 4 of them, the old male, a slightly smaller individual Maya thought might be female, and 2 younger ones, adolescent or young adult. They moved with astonishing quiet for their size, arranging themselves at the clearing's edge in a loose semicircle. Maya's protocol went out the window, replaced by instinct and Ruth's example. She gestured to her camp, to the food supplies, offering hospitality. The old male made a low vocalization, a rumbling sound that Maya felt in her sternum more than heard. The others settled where they were, but their posture shifted from wary to attentive. Maya pulled out the full set of image panels she'd prepared. She laid them out in sequence, using a headlamp for illumination as full darkness fell. Then she began to teach. The first panel, a family tree, simplified, showing parents and offspring with connecting lines. She pointed to it, then to the old male, then to the 2 younger ones. Family, connection. His hand moved in what Ruth had documented as a gesture of affirmation. Fingers spread, palm down, a brief wave. Next panel, the same tree, but with lines that looped back on themselves, patterns that repeated. Beside it, images of plants and animals showing deformities, sickness. She'd struggled with this one, how to convey inbreeding depression visually. She ended up showing shrinking populations, repeating patterns and consequences. The female made a sound, a soft, querying vocalization. The old male gestured, and she came closer, studying the images. Her finger traced the loops, the repetitions. Then she looked at Maya with an expression of profound sadness. She knows. They already know this is happening. Maya's throat tightened. She moved to the next panels. These showed the concept she and her team had developed: genetic rescue. Images of different family groups, exchange, movement, lines from one group to another, mixing. Then the family tree again, but this time with new branches, diverse patterns, vigor restored. She pointed to the images, then swept her arm toward the wider forest. Other groups exchange, mixing strength. The old male's hand moved in a gesture Ruth hadn't documented. Fingers pressed together, then spreading apart. Maya intuited, scattered, far. She nodded, then showed the next sequence. This was the radical part, the piece that required trust. Images showing extraction, a single hair. Then a laboratory setting carefully rendered to look non-threatening. Then symbols for modification. Patterns changed, diversity added, restoration, and finally return, the modified material given back. She pulled out a vial from her kit, showing them real equipment. Then she plucked one of her own hairs, placed it in the vial and held it up. Sample, information, help. The silence stretched. The 4 of them communicated in low vocalizations and gestures Maya couldn't fully pass. The discussion, because that's clearly what it was, lasted nearly 15 minutes. Finally, the old male moved closer. He held out his arm, palm up, and Maya understood. Permission, but show me first. She collected her sampling kit with exaggerated care, narrating in soft tones even though he couldn't understand words. Non-invasive, just a few hairs with follicles, no pain, no harm. She took the sample quickly, sealed it, and then handed him the vial. He held it up to the light, examining it. Then he handed it back and gestured to the younger individuals. They approached, and one by one, they allowed Maya to collect samples. The entire interaction lasted less than an hour. When she'd secured the final vial, the old male touched his forehead to hers once more. Longer this time. Deliberate. Then he gestured to the image panels, specifically to the ones showing laboratory work and return. His expression was unmistakable. Promise. Bring this back. Show results. Maya nodded, touching her chest, then his, then pressing her fist to her heart. I promise. They left as quietly as they'd come, melting into darkness. Maya stood alone in her camp, holding 4 vials that contained the genetic material of a people who'd entrusted her with their survival. The weight of it settled over her like snow, cold, accumulating, inescapable. She radioed Alvarez with 4 words: "Contact successful. We have samples." The genetic analysis took 6 weeks, running samples through sequencing platforms at 3 different facilities under fabricated cover stories. Maya worked 18-hour days, cross-referencing the new data with the historical samples from Ruth's archive. Alvarez and Whitmore connected her with a population geneticist at UC Berkeley who was read into the program. And together, they built a comprehensive picture of what was happening at the molecular level. The results were worse than Maya had feared. Effective population size is under 300, she told Alvarez and Whitmore during a video conference, exhaustion fraying her voice. Genome-wide heterozygosity is down nearly 40% from the 1977 samples. We're seeing runs of homozygosity that indicate recent inbreeding, multiple deleterious recessive alleles approaching fixation. And the Y chromosome diversity is catastrophic. We're looking at maybe 8 distinct paternal lineages across the entire Pacific Northwest population. Survivable? Whitmore asked. Not long-term, not without intervention. They're functional now, but we're seeing the early signatures of mutational meltdown. Give it 3 more generations, maybe 75 years, and you'll have a population that can't recover even with perfect conditions. Alvarez's face was drawn. And with intervention? What are we talking about? Maya pulled up a presentation she'd been building. 3-tier approach. First tier, genetic rescue through synthetic gene drives. We identify the most critical deleterious alleles, variants associated with immune dysfunction, reproductive failure, developmental abnormalities. We use CRISPR-based drives to convert them back to functional versions. Delivers itself through inheritance once you introduce it into the population. Self-sustaining correction. That's heritable modification, engineering their genome to fix what's already broken. Second tier, diversity restoration. We have banked genetic material from the 1977 samples and earlier. We can synthesize what amounts to artificial gamete contributions, introducing genetic diversity from historical population when they were healthier. Technically, we're adding ghost ancestors back into the breeding pool. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. And third tier? Controversial. We've found evidence in the admixture analysis of historical hybridization events with humans. Very rare, but it happened. The genomes carry human-derived segments, mostly immune genes, which means at some level, hybrid offspring were viable and integrated back into the population. So, theoretically, you're suggesting human genetic material as a diversity source. Alvarez's voice was carefully neutral. Only for specific functional sequences, immune genes that would boost pathogen resistance, DNA repair genes that would counter mutation accumulation. We're not talking about humanizing them. We're talking about surgical incorporation of genetic material that their ancestors already proved compatible with their genome. It's restoration, not transformation. The silence on the video call stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Whitmore spoke. Can you explain this to them? Can you get informed consent for something this complex? I have to try, because the alternative is watching them disappear. Maya returned to the valley in early April, when the forest was softening into spring. She brought printed images showing the genetic analysis, simplified but accurate. DNA helices rendered as twisted ladders, healthy sequences shown in one color, damaged ones in another, and crucially, images showing the intervention, specific changes, targeted corrections, restoration of function. She also brought something else, a small sample of the modified genetic material they'd prepared in the lab. Not viable for introduction yet, but ready for demonstration, proof that the work was real, not theoretical. The old male came on the second night, alone this time. Maya had set up the presentation area with more care than before. using LED lanterns to illuminate the image panels arranged in a teaching sequence. She started with the problem, showing him the images of DNA damage, the repetitive patterns that indicated inbreeding, the visual metaphors for system failure. She pointed to these images, then to him, then to the wider forest. This is happening to your people. His hand moved in that spreading gesture she'd learned meant understanding. Next, she showed the solution panels, the edited DNA sequences rendered as ladders with damaged rungs replaced by solid ones. She pointed to the vial of modified material, then to the corrected images. We can fix this. He studied the panels for a long time, fingers tracing the changes. Then he looked at her and made a complex gesture, gathering motion, pulling toward himself, then pushing away. What does this cost? Maya had prepared for this. She showed him images of the process, sample collection, laboratory work, return. Then she showed timescale markers, simplified calendars showing seasons, years. The intervention would take time, patience, trust. She showed him images of offspring, young ones, with health markers restored, vigor, survival, future. He was quiet, his expression unreadable. Then he stood and gestured for her to follow. They walked for nearly an hour through the darkness, the old male moving with confidence through terrain Maya navigated by headlamp. Eventually, they reached a site she didn't recognize, a small clearing marked by a ring of stones arranged with obvious intentionality. In the center of the ring were objects. Carved stones, pieces of worked wood, what appeared to be woven plant fiber, formed into geometric patterns. And at the far edge, a collection of what Maya realized with a chill were bones, long bones, arranged carefully, some carved with markings. He gestured to the site, then to himself, then made a sweeping motion that included the forest. This is us, our memory, our people. Then he pointed to specific carvings on the bones, marks that repeated across multiple pieces, symbols, a writing system. He traced them with his finger slowly, then looked at Maya. The message was clear. We have history, we have culture, we have identity. He picked up one of the carved stones, a figure rendered in profile, unmistakably of his kind, holding what might have been a tool or a weapon. He held it up to the lamplight, then pointed to Maya's genetic modification images. His gesture asked, "Will this change who we are?" Maya felt the weight of the question. She thought of every conversation about genetic engineering she'd ever had, every ethics seminar, every debate about human nature and identity. She pulled out her tablet, preloaded with images for exactly this moment, and showed him photographs of humans across different populations, different skin colors, different features, different expressions. She gestured to all of them, then to herself. Different, but all human. Variation doesn't erase identity. Then she showed him the genetic modification images again, pointing to the specific changes, tiny, targeted, surgical. She held up her fingers with millimeters of space between them, small changes, core preserved. He studied her for a long time. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into a hollow in one of the trees and pulled out a wrapped bundle. Inside was a piece of bark, and on the bark someone had drawn images, pictographic sequences that told a story. The story showed figures of his kind encountering humans, early encounters, judging by the style. Some peaceful, exchange of objects, shared resources, some violent, conflict, fleeing, and then a decision point. One group of figures moving toward human settlements, their forms gradually changing, blending. Another group moving away into deep forest, their forms staying constant. The splitting. He pointed to the second group, the ones who retreated, then to himself. This is us. We chose this. We chose to stay as we are. Maya's heart sank. This was refusal, resistance to change as a matter of cultural identity. But then he continued the sequence. He pointed to the figures moving away, then traced forward through empty space on the bark. His finger stopped in emptiness, but this path ends. We see it ending. He looked at her, and his expression held something she hadn't expected. Grief. Not for himself. He was old. He'd lived his life. But for the young ones. For the family he'd brought to meet her. For the unborn generations that would never exist if the current trajectory continued. He pointed to Maya's modification images again. Then to the carved figure he still held. Then he brought them together, holding one in each hand. His gesture said, "Can we have both? Can we survive and remain ourselves?" Maya pulled out the final image sequence she'd prepared. It showed intervention at the molecular level, DNA repair, diversity restoration, but above it, unchanged, images of their culture. The carved stones, the territorial ranges, the family structures, the choice to remain hidden. She pointed to each element. This we save, this we preserve, this stays yours. She then showed images of humans with genetic conditions that had been corrected. Simplified medical cases where gene therapy had restored health without changing personality or identity. She pointed to these individuals, then made a gesture of wholeness, continuity. Healing isn't transformation. The old male set down the carved figure carefully. Then he placed one massive hand over his chest, over his heart, and looked at Maya with an intensity that made her feel seen on a cellular level. He was searching for something. Trustworthiness, intention, love. Maya placed her own hand over her heart. Then she pulled out the one object she'd brought that wasn't about science, a photograph of Ruth, the same one she'd used in the first invitation images. Her grandmother, young, standing in forest, medical bag over her shoulder, smiling with quiet confidence. She held it up, then pressed it to her chest. She loved you. She spent her life protecting you. I carry that forward. The old male reached out and touched the photograph with one finger, incredibly gentle. His eyes closed briefly. Then he opened them and made a gesture Maya understood as assent, not enthusiastic agreement. This wasn't a choice he wanted to make, but acceptance, necessity, trust. He gathered several objects from the memorial site, small carved stones, one piece of marked bone, and pressed them into Maya's hands. Then he touched his forehead to hers for a third time, holding the contact longer than before. When he pulled back, he vocalized, a low, resonant sound that carried harmonics she felt in her bones. It sounded like sorrow and hope entangled. Then he gestured back toward her camp. Time to return, work to do. The implementation took 14 months. Maya coordinated with a team of geneticists working under deep cover protocols, developing the gene drive constructs with obsessive care. Every modification was tested in cell culture, in computer models, in related primate species. They moved with the caution of people handling sacred objects, because that's what the work was, an attempt to preserve something irreplaceable. Maya returned to the valley 8 times during that period, each time bringing updated images showing progress. The old male met her 5 times, sometimes with others, sometimes alone. They developed a communication system that transcended language, a pigeon of gestures, images, and shared understanding built on mutual respect. On the 6th visit, he brought her to meet the matriarch, an ancient female, grey-faced and slow-moving, but with eyes that held profound intelligence. She studied Maya's presentation with meticulous attention, asking questions through gestures that required 20 minutes to pass. She wanted to understand mechanisms, risks, reversibility. She was, Maya realized, their elder scientist, the keeper of knowledge about plants, healing, the patterns of life. When the matriarch finally gave her assent, she did so by pressing a carved piece of root into Maya's palm. The carving showed intertwined spirals, DNA helices, rendered by someone who'd never seen a microscope but understood inheritance at a level deeper than academic knowledge. The implementation itself was almost anticlimactic. The modified genetic material was delivered through a method so simple it felt absurd, treated food items left at territorial boundaries. The gene drive did the rest, spreading through reproduction, correcting deleterious alleles generation by generation. It would take years to see full effects, but the modeling predicted success rates above 90%. Maya's last visit to the valley came in June 2025. She brought printouts showing the first positive results. Genetic analysis from new environmental DNA samples showing increased heterozygosity, signatures of the corrective modifications spreading through the population. The old male looked at the data she'd rendered into visual form, and his posture shifted, shoulders that had carried tension for months finally relaxing. He made a gesture toward the young individuals present, then toward the forest. They have a future now. He pulled Maya into an embrace that could have crushed her, but was controlled to gentleness. She felt the rumble of vocalization through his chest. Not language, but emotion made physical. Gratitude, relief, grief for the intervention being necessary, hope that it would work. When he released her, he led her back to the memorial site one final time. There, he showed her new carvings added to the bone collection, images showing the sequence of their encounter. Maya arriving, the exchange of samples, the laboratory work rendered in stylized symbols, the return, their history documented in their way. At the bottom of the sequence, someone had carved two figures, one clearly meant to be human, one clearly not, with their foreheads touching. Below them, a single symbol Maya had learned to recognize, the gesture for remember. The old male placed his hand on the carving, then on Maya's shoulder. This is our covenant. We accepted your help. You must accept our terms. Maya knew what he meant. She'd known from the beginning. The work would remain secret. No papers published, no credit claimed, no public recognition. The genetic rescue of a cryptic hominin population would be one of the greatest achievements in conservation biology, and no one could ever know. She touched the carving, then placed her hand over his. I remember, I promise, your secret stays kept. He vocalized one final time, a sound that carried notes of finality and blessing, then turned and walked into the forest. Maya watched until he disappeared, leaving only the ordinary sounds of birds and wind. She gathered her equipment slowly, documenting the site one last time. Before she left, she added her own offering to the memorial, a small photograph printed on archival paper, sealed in protective laminate. It showed Ruth and Maya together, taken years ago at a family gathering, both smiling. Below it, Maya had written one word in marker, guardians. The flight back to Seattle felt surreal. Maya carried genetic data proving the existence of another hominin species, evidence of successful genetic rescue, and documentation of functional interspecies communication. Any one of these elements would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. Together they would rewrite human origins, conservation ethics, and our understanding of intelligence itself. And she would tell no one. Alvarez met her at the facility for the final debrief. The modifications are spreading according to model predictions, she confirmed, reviewing the latest eDNA results. Heterozygosity trending up across all sampled territories. No adverse effects detected. You did it, Maya. You actually did it. We did it. Ruth started this. The monitoring network supported it. I was just the bridge that kept them from extinction. Whitmore joined them, looking older than he had 14 months ago. The question now is, what happens next? You've completed your PhD. You have job offers from major universities. How do you walk away from this work? Maya had thought about this question for months. I don't. I do what my grandmother did. I build a visible career on adjacent research, population genetics, conservation biology. I publish on endangered species and genetic rescue techniques. And beneath that, quietly, I remain part of the monitoring network. I watch over them. I make sure the intervention continues working. And if needed, I'm ready to help again. A life lived in secret, Alvarez said softly. A life lived in service of something that matters more than recognition. Maya looked at the genetic data on the screen, the signature of success built from trust and careful work. My grandmother taught me that some things are too important to claim. This is one of them. Maya completed her PhD 6 months later with a dissertation on genetic rescue strategies in small populations using publicly available data from endangered primates. It won awards. She accepted a position at the University of Washington, where her research focused on conservation genomics, and twice a year she hiked into the Central Cascades with monitoring equipment and image panels showing updated genetic analysis. She left them at the memorial site and waited. Sometimes the old male came. Sometimes others did. Once, a juvenile approached and examined her equipment with obvious curiosity, studying the tablets and samples with an intelligence that made Maya's throat tight. They were surviving. More than that, they were stabilizing. Birth rates ticking upward, genetic diversity spreading. A people who'd chosen invisibility were persisting in a world that left fewer and fewer blank spaces on the map. Maya published nothing about this work. She claimed no credit. When colleagues asked about her frequent hiking trips, she cited stress relief and a love of wilderness. And when she lectured on conservation ethics, she spoke with an intensity her students couldn't quite source about the importance of preserving autonomy, respecting choice, and recognizing that survival isn't just about genetics. It's about the right to exist on one's own terms. In her office, in a locked drawer, she kept the carved stones the old male had given her. And on difficult days, when the weight of secrecy felt overwhelming, she held the stone bird her grandmother had carried for 46 years and reminded herself, this is what love looks like. This is what guardianship requires. The choice to protect instead of proclaim. The decision to serve instead of own. The covenant to remember without revealing. Her grandmother had spent a lifetime keeping this promise. Maya would spend hers honoring it. And in the deep forests of the Cascades, in valleys that appeared on maps but held secrets maps could never capture, a people endured, hidden, autonomous, free. Their survival secured not by exposure, but by the quiet dedication of those who understood that some truths are too precious to share, and some miracles are protected best by silence. The photographs Maya's grandmother had left, the images that had started everything, remained locked in an archive that would never open to public view. They were evidence of first contact, documentation of trust, proof of a covenant between species. But more than that, they were what Maya thought of them as now. Family photographs, images of relatives who'd chosen a different path, cousins separated by evolutionary time, but connected by the fundamental bonds of care, respect, and the recognition that humanity takes many forms, and that some forms of humanity deserve to remain exactly as they are, unknown, unowned, unbroken. What do you think happened next? Did Maya's intervention truly save them, or did something unexpected emerge from the genetic modifications? Share your theories in the comments below, and if you believe some truths are worth protecting with silence, hit that subscribe button. New stories exploring the edges of humanity every week, because the world still holds mysteries. Some of them are just better at hiding. Remember, not all discoveries should be announced. Sometimes the greatest scientific achievement is knowing when to stay quiet.